Welcome to Leading with Purpose, the podcast that's dedicated to helping you become the leader you aspire to be. Join us on a journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and inspiration as we explore the world of leadership and personal growth. In each episode, we will explore the art and science of effective leadership, bringing you insights, stories, and strategies from experts and thought leaders across various industries. And now, your hosts, Dawn Marie Bornheimer, Maisha B. Hoy, Janelle E. Taylor, and Dr. Sharon H. Porter. Hello, and welcome to Leading with Purpose podcast. This podcast is dedicated to helping you become the leader you want to be. I am Dr. Sharon H. Porter, Editor-in-Chief of Vision and Purpose Lifestyle Magazine.
I am Maisha Hoy. I am the CEO of the newly relaunched QBob, as well as Customer First Marketing.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Janelle Taylor, and I'm CEO of Jatora Corporation, award-winning people performance and product optimization.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Bornheimer, and I am the CEO of Mission Inspired Consulting. Excited to be here.
And we are so excited to welcome Dr. Gary Crotaz as our guest for this episode. Dr. Crotaz, he is an executive coach. He's an award-winning author, keynote speaker, and host of the hit leadership podcast, The Unlock Moment. His book, The Idea Mindset, was named Coaching Book of the Year by the Henley Business School in 2022. He has been featured in The Telegraph, The Sunday Times, Stylist Magazine, The Metro, Forbes, and Talk TV. As a coach, Gary has worked with highly talented people in over 20 countries, from senior executives to entrepreneurs and performers, unlocking their potential to achieve extraordinary goals. Welcome, Dr. Crotaz.
Sharon, it is my great pleasure to join you on this amazing podcast. I'm really grateful to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. And I always start out by just letting our guests know that we've shared a little about you, but please take the time to just take us through your journey, because you've been a medical doctor, you've been a dancer, and now you're an executive coach. So I am really interested in learning this journey. So please share with us.
Well, I think the word I normally use for it is eclectic. I think I might also say a little bit unplanned. So, I mean, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a medical doctor, and I went to medical school here in the UK, and I did a PhD in a science lab. And I got to my late 20s, and I suddenly realized something that now I call an unlock moment, but I didn't know it then. But I suddenly realized I don't need to do this career if I don't want to do it. And so I actually decided in my late 20s to not go on and practice as a doctor, take my first hospital job, and instead go into business. So I joined one of the big consulting firms in London, and I started a career for about 10 years working in strategy and consulting in lots of different industries, lots of different types of projects. In my late 30s, I realized I should probably go and get a proper job at some point. And I got approached by somebody that I'd worked for before. And she was working in a major mother and baby retailer here in the UK called Mothercare, which is in the UK, but also in countries around the world. And she said, come and help us out with some of the challenges we're having with all the challenges in retail. And I thought, well, I've never worked in retail. I don't know anything about it. But she said, your way of thinking, your way of problem solving might be helpful. And I thought they'd fire me pretty quickly, but actually they didn't. And I ended up staying there for 5.5 years and became on their executive team. So I ended up building a corporate leadership career and learning to lead, learning to manage in the middle of a very difficult, challenging, turbulent time in UK retail. I think global retail has been really, really difficult over the last sort of 10 to 15 years. And mother and baby retail is always one of the first to be hit when it's sort of economic turbulence, that kind of thing. When I left that role, I started pursuing more of a portfolio career, and I took my first board roles, and I was doing some other advisory work and starting to do very light touch coaching. I'd always loved, working with people in mentoring and coaching. And it was only really in the pandemic when I suddenly went, if I were my own coach and saying, when is the moment when you really love what you're doing? The answer to that question was in a conversation with somebody, in a coaching conversation with somebody. And so I decided to take my coaching and turn it into something as a professional career. The first question one of my long-term colleagues asked me was, and what's your training if you're going to do it professionally? And I went, I haven't thought about that actually. And a week later, I enrolled myself on Henley Business School's coaching program, which is one of the top coaching programs here in the UK. And it was the best thing I ever did. I'd been avoiding going back into education for a long, long time because medical school kind of takes it out of you. And I learned so much, and I really feel, I mean, that was 2020. So, 3-4 years ago now. And I really feel I've been in a growth mindset since then. But actually, I look back on the 20 years between and I think I learned a lot, but I wasn't in this space of constantly feeling mentally stimulated by what I was doing. My secret double life, because you mentioned the dancing, I started learning to be a ballroom dancer at the age of 4. So I was a very cute, in the old days when I was cute, I was a little kid with a bow tie and a crisp white shirt doing ballroom dancing. And I'd done that all the way through when I was growing up, and then really, let it slide when I was in my 20s. I ran out of time to do it. And I actually met my wife to form a ballroom dancing partnership in my late 20s. And we went on to travel around the world, traveled a lot in the US actually, to train and to compete. And we ended up going to 7 world and European championships as professional ballroom dancers. So now in my coaching, and I'm talking to people about purpose, my anecdotes come as much, if not more, from the training studio and the competition floor, thinking about the sort of athlete mindset, the world-class mindset, as it does from the corporate boardroom. And when I was working with my coaching mentor recently, and she was saying, you don't bring the dancing through as much as I thought you would. And I didn't realize until recently how formative it is really in my thinking about how to be at your best. And so now I embrace it a lot more. And I've done a few podcasts recently where I've talked about finding balance as a dancer, and how you find balance as a leader or just as a human. And so it's a really, really interesting journey. So now in the space where I wrote a book, which is all about sort of figuring out your path, figuring out your purpose. I launched this podcast called The Unlocked Moment, which was originally with people I knew, people I was friends with, people I'd coached. And then when you start to get certain people on your podcast, other people go, well, if you've had Marshall Goldsmith on, then other people suddenly want to come. And so I have met the most extraordinary group of people over the last couple of years doing The Unlocked Moment. And I'm asking them about their moments in their life or career where they suddenly figured out the path ahead. And when we talk about purpose, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute, I think I've found something that I hadn't thought about enough before. And when I talk to other people about The Unlocked Moment, they go, I hadn't thought that much about that either. But suddenly it's a new lens on purpose. And so purpose has become something I wasn't searching for. I wasn't striving to build something around purpose, but it's become, absolutely the core of what I'm doing.
Wow.
How's that?
That's awesome. And it actually kind of preludes, you talked about purpose. I want to talk about time. Everything that you've done in your career, from being a medical doctor to helping people find purpose, to being a dancer and an athlete. I'm thinking time. And we said, you've mentioned time 6 times throughout your dialogue. So I want to skip to the idea mindset. I was listening and watching your latest post. And you posted the idea mindset, but I want to know what the 6-week time period has for the discovery and change factor. Why 6 weeks? So is there failures and challenges to that time frame? Number 1, and number 2, what is a success factor in that 6-week time frame that you're seeking after, that program?
That's a really interesting question. Do you want the honest answer?
Always.
The honest answer is to sell a book, you need to have something that feels tangible and feels achievable on the front cover. And the real answer to the question, how long does it take to change your life and figure out your purpose, is as long as it's going to take. And so I often say, I have this phrase where I say, you can't think to a deadline. So if I say to you, decide where you're going to be in 20 years' time or what you want to aim for, and you've got to decide by Friday, you might be able to come up with an answer, but it might not be the right answer for you. You'll come to that answer when you're in the right place to know. And that might be when you're walking the dog. It might be when you're doing the laundry. It might be when you're sitting at your desk trying to figure it out. The journey of getting there is in 6 steps. So the 6 steps are broadly, one is knowing yourself, understanding yourself. The second one is figuring out your overarching, your vision, your mission, the values that are going to lead you there. The third step is thinking about the big picture components. Do you need to build your network? Do you need to develop your skills? Do you need to expand your mindset? The fourth is the detailed plan of all the actual actions you're going to go and do to develop your skills, to build your network. The fifth is about preparing your mind and body for change. So as an athlete, I was very mindful of, it's not about, having an ideal body. I certainly don't have an ideal body, but it's going, if I can maximize my energy, if I can, get good sleep hygiene, it's going to set me up well for the change that I'm facing into. And the last step, the 6th step, is one of the most powerful ones, which is, how do you bring other people on the journey by telling your story in the right way? So you might have figured out that you want to pivot from, I don't know, being, a manager in a company to being an entrepreneur. Well, everybody else still sees you as a manager in a company until you tell them, until you get them to go on that journey with you. So it's going through some exercises of thinking about, what language do I want to use to talk about myself, for other people to recognize about me. What's interesting in that journey is you can do that journey over 6 weeks. They don't have to be 6 weeks in a row. They could be, you can get through one step in the journey in a 7-day period. And I say to people, focus this week on doing that thing. So don't just sort of, go in and out of it. Try and really focus this week on trying to think about, what is my vision? What is my mission? What's the language I want to use for that? And if you've then got a couple of other busy weeks and you want to come back to it, you then come back into the next step. Time is really, really important. As a dancer, I always thought about tempo. I always thought about rhythm. I thought about changes in time. And actually, when I'm working with people in coaching, generally right now, particularly what I'm hearing from people, and this is, top executives and also managers and leaders and people who aren't even in management positions, people feel like they're on a hamster wheel. They feel like they haven't got time to even think about what the future's about. And then I say this to them. I say, the hamster on the hamster wheel, and you feel like that hamster? And they go, yeah. I said, how does the hamster stop running? The answer is, they just decide to stop running, and they just stop. No one else helps them to stop. They just stop. And there's something right now about time where, in order for us to get back into control, back into a place where we can properly think about the life we want, the balance we want, how we want to allocate our time, how we want to prioritize what's important to us, we need to find time to do that thinking. And to do that, we just have to stop on the hamster wheel. And if we don't do that, then we're going to keep telling ourselves and everybody else, I didn't get time to do it this week. So time is one of the most important things. How do you find some? And you find some by stopping running on the hamster wheel.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarity. Now I'm thinking about time even more. So I appreciate that.
So I was introduced to coaching through Dr. Sharon, Dawn, and the What Now movement. I'm just one of those people who just buries myself in information and tries to figure it out. But with your level of people who you speak to in the different industries, how does a person know that it's time for a coach? What is that unlocked moment where they're saying, I'm not doing this, I need help? How does a person know when they need a coach like yourself?
That's a great question. There are 3 questions to think about to answer that. The first is it coaching? Is the thing I need coaching? Or is it training? Or is it mentoring? Or is it counseling or therapy? Or is it somebody senior to me to performance manage me or to help me develop and grow in role? When it's coaching, you're trying to figure something out that you could figure out for yourself. You probably have the answers in there. No one else can tell you. So, for example, how do you want to shape your career ahead? Ultimately, that's a decision for you. How do you want to deal with that difficult conversation you've got coming up with somebody senior next week. Ultimately, that's a decision for you. So is it coaching? The second one, is it now? Is it now that you want to do it? Which means I've got the time to properly put into it, the time to think about it, the time to allocate. So when somebody comes to a coaching session and they're rushing from one meeting, they're checking their phone, they're half engaged in the conversation, it's just not now. It's just not now. And then the third question is, and is it with this coach? And that's a really personal thing. So coaching, when it's super effective, it's a partnership. It's a non-hierarchical partnership. So if the coachee, or my mentor, Claire Pedrick, who's an incredible coach here in the UK, she talks about the coachee, the person being coached, as the thinker. So they're not being coached. Somebody's not doing coach to them. They're doing the thinking. And somebody else, the coach, is just helping them to do that thinking. So when it's the right coach, then you're in that partnership, and that coach is just helping you to move your thinking forward. When coaching works, it actually starts to work very rapidly. So I hear a lot of people, and they've had experience with coaching before, and they say, I had a lot of sessions and I'm not really sure that it did anything. And I go, when it's working, you'll know in session 1, at the latest session 2, that it's a different conversation from the conversation you've had before. It's causing you to face into or think about things that you don't normally think about. The questions are not the normal questions that everybody's asking you. And you come away from it, you go, I might have figured something out actually in that session, and I'm continuing to figure stuff out even after the session is finished. When you're in that space, it's the right coaching partnership. And any decent coach will give you a free chemistry conversation where you can meet them, you can have a bit of that conversation. And my view is, when you know, you know.
Thank you. I may have to take you up on that offer.
There is a really good book that's just come out, actually, called Becoming Coachable. And it's just come out from the Marshall Goldsmith coaches. So it's Marshall Goldsmith, Scott Osman, and Jacqueline Lane, who've just published Becoming Coachable. And it's for the person being coached to think about how do they get into a place where they really benefit from the coaching they're receiving. Yes. And it's the first book of its kind, I think. And it's a really good book, actually.
Thank you. Yes, I will get it.
Beautiful. Well, Dr. Gary, you're speaking my language, because, you know, as a coach trained myself, I always say we're a partner in thinking, right? And we're just helping them ideate. When I was listening to your podcast, I heard you mention the box of keys, and I was really excited to hear you describe that a little bit more for our listeners. What are the box of keys, and how does everyone know which ones are for them?
That's a really interesting question. There's a lot of business books that you read where they shape a method or a framework. And if you follow the method or the framework, then you figure out the answer to your question, how to lead, how to build a team, how to create high performance. And I started thinking, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can explain to people what they need to do, the method they need to follow in order to discover an unlocked moment. The definition of an unlocked moment, though, is it is a sudden, remarkable, unexpected moment of clarity in your life or career. And we haven't all had them, but most of us have had something that feels a bit like this. And a true unlocked moment is the kind where you think back 10, 20, maybe even 30 years, and you remember exactly where you were when that thing happened. When I was 27 years old, I was walking along the corridor of my lab in Cambridge in the UK when this thought came into my head. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. That was the thought. I didn't know whether I was going to leave medicine. I didn't know if I was going to change career. I certainly didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew I had permission to be in control of my own life path, my own career path. And when I've talked to people about unlocked moments, they talk about, you know, a great one starts with, it was raining. I was wearing a blue suit. And I remember this exact moment. I'll tell you some stories later about some examples of unlocked moments. So there isn't a formula, because if there were a formula, it wouldn't be unexpected. But there are triggers, there are keys. And so the idea of this box of keys, which these little 3-minute episodes I do, it's like a little thought or a micro moment. It's just something to trigger your brain. So one example was, I've had this thing for a long time where I've been thinking about, I think it's called the success or the survival paradox. We hear from the people who were successful because they are successful, because they're wealthy, because they're celebrated. And they go, never quit. I never quit. I almost quit. And then I didn't quit. And the day after I thought about quitting, then I won the gold medal or whatever it was. Therefore, you should keep fighting and never quit. And there's something in that. But then I was like, if you're digging in a tunnel and you're digging for the pot of gold and you think it's at the end of your tunnel, and what if it wasn't there? You'd just keep digging forever. And this voice in your head would be going, never quit, because I almost quit and that I was 1 inch away from my pot of gold. I was sitting there going, maybe the pot of gold's in the next field. And all you need to do is stop digging in this futile tunnel, jump over the fence, go into the next field and dig a little tunnel and you find the pot of gold. And so I wrote this box of keys to say, look, just because somebody else found their pot of gold doesn't mean you're about to. And if you decide that what you'd like to do right now is to stop digging in this futile tunnel and go and jump in the next field and try and dig a tunnel there, and you own that decision, go for it. And I was like, that's a box of keys. It's not telling you should do that. It's definitely not telling you you're going to succeed if you do that. But it's just giving people permission to think for themselves and take ownership and be empowered. And I think that's really important. So it's those little triggers that might get you to an unlock moment.
Absolutely beautiful. And I love the framing you offered around the story itself too, because I think those are the things that people retain and remember. So thank you so much for that.
I love it. So, Dr. Gary, you in Idea Mindset, you talk about people using their natural talents, identifying strengths. And as a certified Gallup strengths coach, those are the core tenets of Strengths Finders, right? Focus on your strengths. When you are working with a client, because self-reflection is one of your key components in your book through this 6-week period, do you start with self-reflecting and identifying what your client's strengths are and move from there? Or what is your approach in working with a client for the first time?
So I've been working with strengths for a very long time. I worked with strengths with people that I were in my team in my corporate roles. I worked with strengths with ballroom dancing couples that we were training. They would argue in the studio and then we would get them both to do their top 5 strengths. And they would go, oh, we're really different, aren't we? That's where we argue. Oh, okay, that's interesting. And I didn't become a trained Gallup strengths coach until I was writing the book. And I thought, well, if I'm putting it in my book, then I better have the certificate. And again, like going to Henley Business School to do my coaching training, the training taught me so much more than I thought it would. I've now used strengths with people all over the world in a huge variety of different roles. And it's so powerful because I've used it with a non-executive director of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. I've used it with a retail CEO. I've used it with members of business owning families around the world. I've used it with dancers. I've used it with actors. And with all of them, it tells them something that they sort of already knew, but they didn't really. And they didn't understand how the things that they're most talented at are also the things that trip them up most often. So I changed my process a couple of years ago, where I used to say, if you'd like to do it, do it. Now I say it's still optional, but I haven't ever coached anybody who hasn't done it. And what we should do is, before we get much into what's really going on for you, let's understand a bit more about who you are. And so the first coaching session that I will do with somebody is normally a deep dive into their strengths profile. And invariably, it is the most enlightening session that they have, because they suddenly go, oh yeah, there's this thing. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. There's a guy that I was working with. So he is a senior leader in a private equity organization here in London. And he said, I thought it was wrong. I thought it was wrong because it said my number one strength of the 34 is competition. And I'm not competitive at all. And then 3 months later, he called me up and he went, I have to apologize, because I showed it to my wife and she laughed and she said, you're the most competitive person I've ever met. And he didn't recognize it in himself because he thought the competition was competing against other people. And she said, no, you don't compete against other people. You compete against yourself. And you're really competitive. And he said, understanding that suddenly framed him in a completely new light. So this is back to this piece of when coaching is impactful, it's impactful really quickly. It didn't mean he had all the answers. It didn't mean he got everything sorted out. But suddenly he had a new perspective on himself that was really powerful. In the idea mindset, the idea is actually an acronym. So idea stands for identity, direction, engagement, authenticity. And what it means is discover who you are, what's important to you, what your talents and strengths are, what your values are. That's your identity. And then think about your direction, a little bit about the long term, not exactly where do I think I'm going to be in 20 years' time, because honestly, none of us know, but a little bit about, do I want to be working as an expert, or do I want to be a generalist? Do I want to have many things going on, or do I want to do one thing? Am I trying to build legacy? I don't really care about legacy. Is family more important? Is power important? Is money important? That's the future direction piece. What's really important in direction is I've got decisions I need to make tomorrow. When somebody calls me up and says, do you want to quit your job and come work for us? You've got to make that decision pretty much tomorrow. So how do you make that decision? And you're aiming for a future with engagement and authenticity. So you're aiming for a future where you get up in the morning and you go, pretty much, I love what I do every day. I'm sure that all of us, we're sitting here going, what we've chosen to do with our lives is because we love this stuff. We love it. But also it connects deeply with our sense of values and purpose. And for a lot of people, they don't really know what their sense of purpose is. When you've gone through this journey and you go, okay, I do know my identity. I'm clear on that, even though it's not necessarily what other people think it should be. That's the key thing, because so much of the time we're following what we are told we should be doing. We're thinking about that identity. We're thinking about that direction. And we're starting to say, okay, this is why I do what I do. This is where I'm going. It comes out as something that I call triple clarity. So triple clarity is I'm clear on who I am. I'm clear on how I decide. And I'm clear on the things I need to do next. So clarity of thought, clarity of decision, clarity of action. And when you meet somebody with an idea mindset, and some people have naturally got it, and some people get it by going through this kind of journey, they go, I just know. This is what I do because it's the perfect thing for me, because I love it. Other people go, oh, well, you could make more money if you did something else. I could, but I choose not to. That's what the idea mindset sounds like. It sounds like this incredibly pure clarity. When I'm working with the kind of people that I'm working with, I think what's really striking today, in 2023, 2024, there's a huge number of people who are deeply uncertain, actually, about their life or about their career. We've obviously just come through the pandemic. It's thrown everybody's lives up into this world. They don't quite know what's happening in the future, and they feel uncertain, and they're looking for clarity. And so when I'm talking about purpose, when I'm talking about these sort of structured approaches to figure out your path, they're looking for clarity. They're not necessarily looking for what they were looking for before, which was the best outcome, the most money, the most successful they could be. They're just saying, I want the hamster wheel to stop. I want to feel like I'm not regretting that every decision I made was maybe the wrong one, that I've got this sort of constant inner wobble of, was that the right answer? Was that the right answer? Should I have done that? Shouldn't I have done that? And that's the outcome of coming through this kind of process and finding your purpose. You get to a place where you go, that's it. It's as simple as that. And when you're there, it is the easiest thing. It's really hard to find it. And when you're there, it's the easiest thing. And that's a good example of thinking about balance. When you see that ballet dancer who's on point, perfectly in balance, in that moment, in that place, they've got to use internal muscle to hold themselves there, but it is easy because they are right on balance. If they're not quite on balance, it's really hard. It's really hard to hold yourself in that position if you're not quite on. When you're right on the head of the pin and you're exactly on balance, it's called in ballet aplomb. It is easy. And that's what we're looking for.
Clarity and balance is so super important because you are, as a coach, coaches are givers. And I've learned from talking to these three amazing and phenomenal women over the years about balance. We've had a really in-depth conversation sometime last year. But I have a personal question for you, Dr. Cortez. How do you balance the pursuit of pursuing and achieving your business goals? Because you are out here to help people, and especially with the C-suite level. How do you balance pursuing your business goals with your own financial success? Because you know how to get off the hamster wheel. You have that pinnacle of balance and clarity. So do you have any new rules for yourself regarding that?
Very interesting. There's an exercise that I do with a lot of my coachees that I call needs, wants, and compromises. And it comes from the time when Mildred, my wife, and I were traveling around the world, spending, we didn't have sponsors, we didn't have funding. So we were earning money in a day job and then spending that money on travel and accommodation and training and a tail suit and a ballroom dress and all this kind of stuff. We spent all our money doing that. So we didn't have holidays. Our honeymoon, we went to a training camp in Italy because we didn't have money for a sort of separate holiday to do that all the time. And we realized that the things we really need are actually a really short list of things. When I'm working with people now and I get them to do needs, wants, and compromises, and I say needs, okay, needs is a list of the things that absolutely you need. So food on the table, great, but not luxurious food on the table, food to sustain you on the table. A roof over your head, it doesn't have to be, an extraordinary roof over your head. It's a roof over your head. That's the need. You want it to be really nice food. You want it to be a really nice, of course you do. You want to have 2 holidays a year and you want to drive a Ferrari. Great. But that's a want, not a need. And going through that exercise, people suddenly realize that what they thought was a long list of needs is a really short list of needs. And the compromises is, what would you compromise in order to have all the things you need and some of the things you want? So when I play that back for myself, actually, financial success is not a big component at all. It's not a need. It's a sort of want. But case in point, right now, we're in the process of moving house here in the UK to somewhere that's going to halve our costs of living. Because by halving our cost of living, it buys me the ability to have complete choice as to who I work with and how I work. Where we live at the moment, which is somewhere where we moved here when I was doing, high profile executive, highly paid roles, I would have to coach in a certain way or have to build a certain business in order to support the financial constraints of the place that we choose to live. What I want is freedom. I want to say, if you're the person that I should be working with, and that's not about how much you're paying, it's about whether we're the right fit and whether there's great impact that we can have, we should be working together. And I shouldn't be going, am I making enough money from that? So the person that I have coached for the largest volume of coaching over the last 3 to 4 years has never paid for coaching. But we work together because it's the right partnership. And we've been working together since 2019, 2020, so 3 to 4 years now. For me, it's not about the money. It's not about fame. But for some people it is, and that's absolutely fine. It's just knowing what it is for you. For me, I think it's something about feeling like I had impact. And the way I describe it is I want to feel like I had impact on one person or many people, but one person is enough. And sometimes it even feels like to have a chance to have impact on one person is enough. I don't measure outcomes with coachees. I feel like, if we're in a how much money are we making, or, how much performance improvement did you achieve? I feel like, well, that's for the coachee and their sponsor to figure out. And if they think it's not enough, then we're going to stop working together. But that rarely happens. It helps you to focus in on really why you're there. And I think that's a really important thing. So in that question of how do I find balance, it's about being incredibly clear about what I'm trying to do. If you looked at my time schedule here in the UK, you go, it's ridiculous that I do a lot of hours. I do a lot of hours on stuff that I love doing, lots of which is not, you might say, is not, if I was trying to build revenue, I would build a different shaped business. I absolutely would build a different shaped business. But that's not the business I want to build. And people say to me, why don't you do online courses? Why don't you do scaled events? I go, because that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to have impactful conversations with people in a coaching context, and the right people. And if that's one person, or if that's 5 people, or if that's 50 people, it's whatever the right answer is. And I know that I have to make compromises in order to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Compromises are undoubtedly part of, whatever journey we're serving. But I love that you and your wife, Mildred, are staying grounded in your purpose. So thank you for that question.
It's very important when you think about compromising, particularly compromising financial goals, that you're on the same page as the other person who lives your life with you.
That's not a compromise.
And I think that it's important to say that we are very, very aligned, but we know we are because we have that conversation all the time. And there's a lot of people where one of the struggles that they have is they're not quite aligned. So this idea of sort of clarity, align, act is really, really important. Make sure you're aligned with the other people impacted by the choices you're personally making. I think that is important.
Thank you. It's awesome.
Such a great reminder too, Dr. Gary. So my question for you is really focused around the person who's in a transition, right? And I'll share briefly a personal story where this question is coming from. And so we have military orders. We arrived here in Hawaii, and the day before we moved into our home, I was laid off from my company. And I had a decision to make, right? I was at a pivotal point. I had heard the whispers before, right, of I should go build my own thing. And I had this opportunity and this unique big shift in life to pay attention or to go back to more of the same. And so I would love to hear from you some of the questions you would ask, one of your clients, coaching clients, to really think about if you're in a transition like that, where a decision was made somewhat for you, but now you have an opportunity to reframe that and say, this is happening for me, and how can I proceed forward? I'd love to just hear some of those thoughtful, reflective questions you may invite them to think about.
And I really appreciate that. There's a lot of people right now are going to be in that kind of place. When I was in retail, we were in a time when our retailer and lots of retailers were closing a lot of stores, and a lot of people who've been doing what they did for 20, 30, 40 years were being laid off. And have over the following year, some of them have got other roles in retail, but others have had to change career completely into different areas, and that's a very challenging thing. I think that it's never easy, and I think that's where I always start. It's important to say you can make it sound, oh well, if you just do these things, then you will change your life and it'll be great. And there are an awful lot of books you can buy that say that, which I don't like those books. I call them the "If you eat the breakfast I eat, then you too will become a millionaire" books. Those books. I don't like them because, again, you're hearing from somebody who may have been very successful, or they may be very good at telling a story of being very successful. And actually, you can take people down a very difficult path there. I spoke to somebody on the podcast who said, I've never met anybody who's gone to one of those "I'll become a millionaire" boot camps and become a millionaire, but the person at the front is a millionaire. And that's the first important thing to say. Then I would say, in that difficult, challenging time, you have to have a really honest conversation about what is really important here. And back to the compromises, is it about having a roof over your head and food on the table? Is it about, you might have kids and, how you want to set up the home for the kids? And what does that mean right now is the most important thing you need to sort out. Is it money? And would you compromise the perfect role or a role with the perfect future career journey for more significant, more sort of guaranteed money of a certain level in the short term? Or are you in a position where actually building something for the future is more important, and therefore, money might be something you can compromise on at the moment? I often ask people to think about their runway. Their runway is, if you stop where you are now and you say, this is the amount of money we've got, and these are the costs of our daily life, and I didn't have any more money coming in, how long would I go for before I couldn't pay my rent or I couldn't put food on the table? And people will go, well, I don't think I'll ever be in that situation. I go, calculate it. Sometimes they say, oh, it's much less than I thought, actually. But I hadn't added up those numbers. Sometimes they go, oh, it's much longer than I thought. As soon as you know whether your runway is 2 months or 2 years, it completely changes your thinking about the risks you're prepared to take. So that's a very powerful question. Then I think it is really helpful to start thinking about purpose and start thinking about purpose for you where you are in your life or in your career. And I think I often have a conversation with people where everybody feels like they're running out of time or they're slightly too old. I'm working with somebody at the moment. He's a successful senior accountant in an accounting business, and he was telling me how he felt like he was running out of time. He'd probably passed the time when he could make the decisions about his future. And I said, "Can I ask an impolite question? How old are you?" And he said 38, and I just laughed. And I went, "How old was I when I took my first job in a retail company when I never worked in retail before?" And he went, "Don't know." And I said 38. He went, "Oh, that's interesting." So that idea of whether you're 28 or 38 or 58 or 78, you can think about what you want to do with the next phase of your career. I recently interviewed an incredible, inspiring woman called Vicky Sato on the podcast, who I've known a long time, and she's been a coaching client in the past. She is a pioneering founder in the biotech industry in the US. She was in the initial team at Biogen in Boston in the 70s. And she's gone on to be hugely successful in biotech and pharma. And she now has a position in the White House on the Science and Technology Committee in the White House. And at a late stage in her career, she asked herself the question, what do I really want to do next? And she realized that the options that she was really being offered were not the same as the things she really wanted to do. And so opening up her mind to, well, what do I want to do? What's important to me? If I could choose and I didn't care about what other people thought, what would I choose? It opened her mind to different options that she hadn't considered before. And she wanted to continue to learn. And I tell that story because most people that I'm working with are maybe 20, 30, 40 years younger than Vicky. And they're feeling like they're running out of time. And I'm saying, you're really not. So I think that we're learning, particularly through the pandemic, that anybody at any stage of their life or career can choose to do something different. And there's not only one path that will lead you to happiness and success and fulfillment. And you don't have to know that the thing you're going into is going to be successful to start it. But what you do have to do, and this is part of when you go through the idea mindset process, one of the questions that I ask in that is, if this were to all go wrong and fail, what are the likely causes of that happening? I run out of money. I run out of motivation. I haven't got somebody to help me along the way. Well, what could you do to help mitigate those now? If you think ahead to what might trip you up, what could those things be? So I think it would be really helpful for somebody in this kind of difficult situation to think about what's really important to me. What are my choices ahead? If it doesn't work out, where might I get tripped up? How can I make the whole thing a bit more robust? And really, how much time have I got to choose by calculating my runway? Those are some of the things that might be helpful to a person in that situation.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I know so many people that are moving through some transition in this season, and I think what you've just offered is a beautiful value add. In addition to, of course, they can learn more from your resources. But thank you. That was really powerful.
This is so funny. I was just getting my nails done, and the nail technician's husband just lost his job after 28 years of being in one position for the rest of his life. So I cannot wait for this to air so I can send him this podcast, because I think he'll learn a lot from it as I have. My question or my comment or what I would love for you to really talk about is authenticity. And when does that happen? So you pick your purpose or your trying to pick your purpose in life. I sometimes I feel there's a fight within myself of, I know the purpose, but am I really living that? And is that what you're talking about when you say authenticity?
I wonder whether we can try something out here. This could
Oh,
be
yes,
really
let's try it. Let's try it. We can do it. We can do it.
Lots of people go to workshops about purpose and finding their why. And they're good things to do, but they can be a little bit superficial, because to that, you can't think to a deadline. I don't think you can discover your purpose in an hour either. You might be able to, but I can't guarantee that everyone in the room is going to find that. The unlock moment, this moment of remarkable clarity in your life or career, is a lens on a purpose you might not even have connected with. And what I've learned, and I didn't expect this to happen on the podcast, but it's happened time and time again, and now I think I want to write a book about it, is people say, I've never made that connection before. And literally right now, I am editing an episode with a guy called Dean Miles. He's one of the world's leading coaches. He's part of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 group of coaches in the US. He started his career as an undercover DEA agent, Drug Enforcement Agency agent, and now he's a world-leading coach. And I said, so you have to be really good at reading people in both of those situations then. And he went, I've never made the connection about reading people who are, good. He said, good people gone bad in society, and the people he's working with now, but he's using the same instinctive talent of reading people. So there's two questions that I asked to get to this level of purpose. And Maisha, would you be up for answering my two questions?
Yes, I am.
That's good. Okay. Question one, and this question isn't tell me your life story. It's quite a specific question. Where do we need to start in your story in order to understand the person you are today? And some people say my early 20s. Some people say when I was 4 years old. Where would we need to start in your story to understand the person you are today?
I would say 10 years ago. 10 years ago when I started my company. And the reason why I started was to really help African-American technology companies with their marketing. And it's kind of morphed since then.
But to really understand who you are, where do we need to start?
Who I am? Oh my gosh. I cannot answer that question, Dr. Gary, because I haven't thought about that question. I mean, I think I change who I am almost every interaction with everyone I meet, every single time. This conversation with you today, I'm already thinking I'm changing again. But maybe motherhood, because motherhood was the one time I had to decide as a single mom, who was I going to be as a parent and how was I going to parent my child? So I would say motherhood.
Okay, question two. Powerful, this stuff. And I really appreciate you sharing, by the way. Question two. Is there a moment that you think back and you think, I remember exactly where I was, who I was with, what I was thinking, when I suddenly had the moment of clarity or I knew something that I didn't know before? What comes to mind when you think about that?
Could you say that question again for me?
So it's a really vivid memory. You remember exactly where you were, who you were with, what you were thinking, when you suddenly had this remarkable flash of clarity, something you knew that you didn't know before.
Yes, I was 12. And I was 12. If you would have to get to know me, but I've been essentially the same person since I was 12, in the sense of you're not going to tell me how I'm going to be. And the reason is because my mom came home. I just had this glowing report from my teacher, and my mother said something that I was like, what? We didn't hear the same thing. So I recognized then that I'm going to be a person who charges my own path at 12.
I'm going to be a person who charges my own path. You told me the first answer to the question was, this was the moment when I set up my business and went on this thing. You did that because at 12, you said, I'm going to be a person that charges my own path. This is the power of the unlock moment. This is the thing that I didn't know was there. I didn't know was there when I started being curious about people. but it's so powerful. The question about authenticity, that is you. We don't know each other at all, but I now know something about who you are, how you're going to be, the strength you have within you from a little morsel of a story. You haven't told me your life story. You haven't told me lots of stuff here. You've told me a morsel, and that's powerful. I do keynotes around the unlock moment, including some corporate keynotes. And I did this event in the summer of this year for a professional services consulting firm. And they had the global managing partner was on the stage, and all of the global directors were in the room. And he said, I'd like to do this on stage. And he told a very personal story about a conversation he'd had with his father. And then he burst into tears on stage in front of 180 of his senior directors. And he said, but I'm okay with that because I want you to know who I am and why I do what I do. And it was the most powerful thing. It's the most powerful thing because they suddenly understood that the reason he was there was not for money, was not for fame, was not for status, was not for admiration, was because it mattered to him that he made something of his life because of a conversation he had with his father. And that's authenticity. So when people come out of a workshop and they go, I've got my why statement and I understand it's about, it's not wrong. I don't think it's wrong. But I don't know that it's fully real. I don't know today that I could really articulate a purpose statement for myself. It's not about having a statement. But I absolutely know why I do what I do. And to the previous question, it's not about the money. It's nothing to do with the money. Lots of other people might have a different opinion about that because they're not me doing what I'm doing. And lots of other people might have an opinion about, Maisha, what your choices you make because they're not you. And that's the thing. That's true authenticity. It's about knowing yourself and going to a place. Remember that thing you said where you said, I don't know the answer to that question because I haven't thought about it yet. And that's really interesting. People remember the times when they did a thing often. They say, I remember the day I walked out of my company for the last time. And I go, when was the moment you knew you were going to do that? Oh, that's different. That was 4 years before. And I was having a conversation with my boss and they made me feel like I wasn't worth something. Oh, really? Okay. And what came into your mind then? Well, then my grandmother sang this thing in my ear when I was 7. Oh, okay, interesting. I've never made that connection before, they say. Yeah, okay, interesting. And this, for me, is the beauty of being curious about people, creating space, having these kind of powerful conversations. You can have these conversations in silence. That's the other interesting thing. Because this kind of conversation can go to a very vulnerable, very personal space. As a coach or as a podcast host, I don't need to know. It's not important at all for me to know. It's important for you to know. It's important for you to know. So you can have this conversation. You can say, I'm going to ask you this question. And there'll be people listening to this podcast and they'll be thinking, what is that for me? And I'll go, and you don't need to know straight away because sometimes you don't. And you'll be reflecting on it, as we say in the UK, noodling on it. You'll be noodling on it. And then when you know, you'll know. And then you'll start to make these connections. I was in a conversation with a husband and wife over coffee a couple of weeks back, and we were talking about the unlock moment. And I asked those 2 questions of the wife, and she was telling her story. And then we carried on talking about something completely different. And then the husband suddenly went, when I was 12 years old, this thing happened to me. And I hadn't asked him. And it just arrived. And he suddenly made a connection. And we weren't trying to do anything. It was just a moment. And I think it was really powerful for him. That's authenticity.
Well, this has been really powerful for me, Dr. Gary, so much. I can't wait to rewatch this.
Thank you for playing my game.
Of course.
I really appreciate that. I'm
Well,
interested to hear from the other three of you what you heard and what was your experience hearing Maisha talk about that.
Well, I can jump in for sure. I was literally sitting here going, when you became a mama, in my head, I was like, when you became a mom, that changed you forever. Like, and when you arrived at that, I was like, yes, right. And I know only a fraction of your story as well, but like that moment in my head, because I've heard how you speak about your son and just about your intention behind how you live, work, and operate and move through the world because of that relationship and dynamic and that part of your identity, in addition to so many other things that inspire you to be who you are. And so I just felt like I was excited for you that you felt that answer come through for you. And I just appreciate you working through the thoughts and the feelings that had to come through for you to even arrive at sharing something more with Dr. Gary, since that wasn't something you had originally thought much about for yourself.
And I applaud it.
Good job.
I mean, yes, absolutely, Maisha. And I love that you didn't answer right away to the first question, because usually we're in the sales, mode. And I love that you paused, pause. And that's authenticity to me, because you're not really to spiel out this, plastic answer, but you know yourself when you pause, wait a minute now, and you had to think about it, and you dug in deep, and then you found something, to offer your true memory of what he asked you for the second question. So, and thank you for for asking that question, because I was remembering how hard last year was for me to be vulnerable. Have to be a brick, have to be strong. But, again, I'm learning so much from you guys, and thank you, Dr. Gary, that it's okay to give yourself permission. I mean, I was asking, why do we need permission? Why do we need permission? But you don't know that you need it when the expectation is always, as such. So I appreciate this conversation so much.
Absolutely. I was thinking we were in a mini masterclass, is what I was thinking. Absolutely. Coaching on the spot. That's what I was thinking. And was really trying to play back my responses to those questions as well. So we really appreciate this conversation, this dialogue that we've had, and you're just shedding light on a lot of discovering information that I know our viewers and our listeners can take and utilize and implement. So thank you, Dr. Gary. Please share with our audience where they can connect with you, where they can follow you and learn more about your book and your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's been my absolute pleasure and delight to be with you today. So you can find me, my website is garycrotaz.com. So GaryCrotaz.com. And you can find information on there about the book and the podcast. The book is at theideamindset.com, and it's available on Amazon and all major channels in all countries around the world. The Unlock Moment is theunlockmoment.com. It's on Apple, Spotify, and all the different podcast platforms. And then I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. So please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you there. And I post regularly about the various things that I'm doing and trying to advance the conversation around this sort of true connection to your deepest sense of purpose. That's what I'm really fascinated to get to. And if you've heard something in this conversation that has sparked something in you, then I'd love you to share it. So.
Awesome. Thank you again, Dr. Gary. And to our audience, thank you for joining us for Leading with Purpose podcast today. Again, I am Dr. Sharon H. Porter.
I'm Janelle Taylor.
I am Maisha Hoy.
I am Dawn Marie Bornheimer. And as you navigate your leadership journey, remember that leading with purpose is not just a philosophy, but an opportunity to make a deeper and more positive impact.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your network and subscribe, and so that you do not miss another opportunity to really have this intersection of leadership and purpose. Remember to continue to lead, empower, inspire, and achieve. And until next time, lead with passion, lead with a positive intent, and by all means, continue to lead with purpose. Thank Thank you for joining the Leading with Purpose podcast. Please join us every Monday for a new episode.